every single one of us was once in the womb. Every single one of us was once a child in this kind of vulnerable situation, including Stella Creasy, including Stella Brown. And through some happy chance of, they would regard it, I guess, as accident or fate, they were not dismembered or poisoned in the womb. And yet that is precisely what they're campaigning for the right to do to every other single person in that situation.
It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of About Abortion, which will comprise a fair amount of storytelling from Uncle Tim here, who has been doing some fantastic research for us and wants to bring really a story that spans well over a century, which is very little known, but incredibly important, as relates especially to our Abortion Act of 1967, but also the upcoming general election, whenever that may be. And one of the questions lurking behind our conversation today is, can a Christian vote Labour, or should a Christian vote Labour? It's looking at least somewhat likely at this stage that Labour will win. And how should we as Christians think of that? So we're talking here today of two Stellas, a tale of two Stellas, and these Stellas are separated by about 100 years in terms of their date of birth. We're stretching right back, Tim will correct me, I'm sure, if I'm wrong, but we're stretching right back to, I think, 1880, the date of birth of our first Stella, and then almost exactly 100 years later, another. The first one died before the Abortion Act and yet was absolutely pivotal in its coming into existence. The second one is somewhat fond of the Abortion Act, but for her, it doesn't go nearly far enough. So without further ado, Tim, let me hand over to you. Tell us a little bit about where we're going today, who are these two Stellas, and hopefully it'll become clear to listeners why this matters. But yeah, tee us up, Tim. Where are we going today?
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, so a tale of two Stellas. So some of the story really of the first Stella Brown, we did cover quite a lot of in the Red Roots of Abortion podcast we did a few weeks ago. So I'm not gonna do a huge amount on that time period, but just to kind of summarize, sum up some of the important points about Stella Brown. So that's our first Stella. As you say, Dave, born 1880, died 1955. So died actually before the Abortion Act was passed, of course, 67. But Stella Brown was a long time, very ardent campaigner for abortion, and she was really instrumental in laying the foundations for the pro-abortion movement and kept a lot of the momentum going actually in the decades before that act passed, when a lot of people weren't particularly exercised over this issue. She really was obsessed about it, really. She was also, I would suggest, deeply anti-Christian in her outlook, and this came across in various ways. She made frequent attacks on the goodness of marriage, the goodness of motherhood, the gift of children. She has lots of memorable lines. None of them are particularly nice. So, for example, not abortion, she said, but forced motherhood is the crime. And she was really a self-described feminist and communist. They were maybe the two labels that she felt best captured what she was about. So she admired the Soviet Union, which was one of the first countries in the West, if you can sort of count Russia as the West, to legalise abortion. And she actually resigned from her membership of the UK Communist Party when the Soviet Union a few years later reversed that legislation. So, talk about a single issue voter.
Wow. So too communist for the Soviets at that stage.
Too communist for the Soviets, and wow. Certainly on this abortion issue, she felt they weren't being extreme enough. She was a close friend of Margaret Sanger, who we talked a little bit in the Red Roots podcast as well. She was also virulently anti-Irish, anti-Catholic. And then in terms of her personal life, Stella Brown herself had an abortion, which of course was then illegal. And she publicly talked about this. She publicly celebrated it, if you like. She shouted her abortion, or whatever the phrase is these days. But that was very unusual. That was shocking, really, at this time. And I think she enjoyed creating a little bit of controversy. She was one of the co-founders of this very important organization called ALRA, which stands for the Abortion Law Reform Association, which began in 1936. So that's kind of the era we're in. And yeah, as I say, even amongst those who were campaigning for abortion, this was still largely a taboo subject, and even those who were for it were quite careful in how they went about that. But Brown, I think, was different. She was very outspoken. She was very extreme about this. How did she describe it? As the moral right to abortion. So, an absolute right up to the age of viability, which first half of the 20th century, that was judged to be 28 weeks. So, if you like, she was actually even more extreme than our current abortion laws, which tend to draw the line at 24 weeks, still very arbitrary, still very late by European standards. But Stella Brown was even more extreme than that. But as we'll see shortly, our second Stella, Stella Creasy, is now trying to out Stella Brown in her feticidal aspirations. So Stella Brown, though, against any kind of restrictions up to 28 weeks. Again, another one of her catchphrases, for our bodies are our own. So in other words, the kind of slogans we hear routinely bandied around today to kind of just, dismiss the pro-life cause or argument, these really originate, I think, with Brown's way of thinking, this very deeply anti-Christian, sexually libertarian, really, feminism. And in fact, some of Brown's arguments for abortion were really essentially about abortion being a less cumbersome, a more convenient means of birth control than the current methods on offer in her day that tended to inhibit, in her view anyway, sexual pleasure. So according to Brown, sex should be pursued without commitment, without consequence, and abortion resulting from not having to use such cumbersome contraception methods was really a small price to pay for that uninhibited pleasure. So you hear overtones really here of Anne Furedi, who's one of her justifications on record for abortion is really, well, contraception when it fails or when we've forgotten to use it. So hopefully, Dave, that paints a bit of a picture of our first Stella. So I would say militant feminist, very hard left politically, communist, if you like, anti-Christian, very derogatory about motherhood, about family values generally, someone who was sexually promiscuous. Actually, she practiced what she preached. An extreme advocate of abortion on demand as a right linked to bodily autonomy. So I would say, this is not a compliment, but in many ways she was a very modern, very ahead of her times in how she viewed and promoted abortion.
So, and this was all before the 1960s.
Absolutely, yeah. But I think probably the people of the people of the feminists in the 1960s, I think, very much would have looked back to Stella Brown and really kind of idolized her, really seen her as a woman ahead of her time. I think that's how they would have viewed her, and she was, in their words, in their way of thinking, sort of fighting the fight before they kind of took up the baton, and perhaps before the public mood had got a little bit further down the road they wanted to go.
Yeah. I mean, incredible foresight, isn't it? Culturally, they are saying things which are familiar now, but actually in the 50s, even in the 60s, yes, in some of popular culture, you'd hear these things, but certainly the tenor of the parliamentary debate was nothing like that. We didn't hear, even in 66, 67, people were not talking about my body, my choice. This is an overly cumbersome thing to have to use contraception. You didn't hear that, and yet these seeds were planted so long ago, and it's a sobering reminder, isn't it, just how what starts as an outlandish fringe idea at a sort of liberal elite academic level really does take root, doesn't it? And it ends up affecting the whole of society. And I think we Christians are often late to that party. We're in denial about where that's going until it's, in one sense, of course God can do anything, but in one sense it's too late by the time it's taken root. Well, actually the time we should have acted was back in the in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, whenever it was that people were first spouting such ideas.
Yeah. I suppose the only silver lining to that, Dave, is, I mean, absolutely right. I agree with that diagnosis 100%, really. But I suppose the only thing you may want to positively spin it is that, it wasn't very long ago that Stella Brown was the outlier culturally, even within a sort of, nominally Christian nation. So if that's the case, then I think that there is hope for a country like the UK. There is hope that this issue that at the moment seems quite niche, even within Christian circles, I think there is hope that the nation as a whole can come to see the reality of what abortion is and what abortion does. But we've got some way to go. I think this is not the time to be kind of patting ourselves on the back, really, or slowing down. So that was the first Stella Brown. Let's talk about Stella Creasy, second Stella that we're thinking about today. So Stella Creasy, born 1977, so over 20 years really after Stella Brown died. So these two women didn't overlap at all. And into a UK, which, as we've sort of suggested, was quite different. The UK post-60s, even towards the end of the 70s, actually. A full 10 years previously that Parliament had passed the Abortion Act. And so although Stella Creasy becomes a very staunch supporter of abortion and advocating for removing actually what last minimal restrictions remain, she wasn't involved in the quote-unquote fight for abortion in the first place. Politically, someone who also has a long association with the Labour Party. She interned with the Fabian Society in the late 90s. And then since 2010, so what's that, 13 years, she's been the Labour MP for Walthamstow. My geography of London's not great, but that's North London, isn't it?
It is indeed, yeah. We sometimes refer to it as the People's Republic of Walthamstow. Our dear friend Christian Hacking, I think, still literally has a sort of restraining order. He's not allowed to step foot in her private kingdom. But anyway.
Yeah, well, so probably not actually as hard left as some within Labour, or perhaps even as Stella Brown was. So she's been quite critical actually of Corbyn and the Momentum movement in the past. She's very active on Twitter. I think we should say that. The Independent newspaper in 2014 described her as one of the brightest lights of Labour's new generation, but also perhaps picking up on some of her Twitter battles, made mention of adjectives including haranguing and aggressive. We are going to talk a lot about Stella Creasy. Before we do, as we do, I do want to emphasise, I think she's made some positive contributions in her political career. I think it's important to say that. She has been very critical of payday loans companies, people like Wonga and the like, and she's helped shape government policy on greater regulation for them, which I think is a really good thing. She's also supported things like No More Page 3 campaign against the Sun newspaper. So one or two things she's been involved with, I think we'd probably all agree are positive things. Strong feminist. She's also argued in the past, 2018, that misogyny should be classified as a hate crime. So kind of wanting to sort of really up the ante on things like that. That was in the context of sexual harassment of women. And again, we all agree the harassment of women is wrong. I suppose the issue then becomes, well, what behaviours would fall into that bracket? So for Creasy, it's very clear that would include kind of any and all unwelcome comments that could be interpreted in that way, as well as things like wolf whistling, like a stranger wolf whistling on the street. Now, whether such behaviour should automatically be deemed criminal, whether you could kind of get to prison or be fined for that, I guess is more debatable. It's probably a range of views amongst both men and women. I mention this, Dave, really because I think it helps us see something of the inconsistency, that characterises Stella Creasy's policies and rhetoric. So on the one hand, she's arguing very forcefully for the criminalisation of unwelcome comments, demeaning wolf whistling. So there's a very high view, a very high bar on the dignity of women and a desire to safeguard that. Again, I think that's a good thing. But then on the other hand, she is campaigning really with every fibre of her being, I think, to decriminalise abortion. So she is campaigning with all her might to remove what little protections are left for the unborn child in this country. Really, she wants to make abortion legal, up to birth, on demand, and for any reason. So wolf whistling should be criminal, but dismembering a 40-week-old infant in her mother's womb is presented as some kind of perverse human right to be celebrated, to be protected in law. And when it comes to desire for abortion on demand, abortion for any reason, let's not be naive here. There are many communities globally, and many of which are represented in the UK, where baby boys are much more desirable than baby girls. And so abortion on demand, abortion for any reason, is going to disproportionately impact female babies, female children in the womb, which is ironic, because all of this is, as I say, being presented as some kind of, this is just, just finishing off a sort of feminist movement, a feminist cause. This is just kind of tying up the loose ends. Well, it's going to lead to a massive number of female babies being killed, even more so than are currently. So, yeah. So, as I say, wolf whistling at a 19-year-old woman walking down the street, that should be a criminal act. Killing a baby girl at 9 months in the womb should be perfectly legal. And I think when you kind of say it out loud like that, you have to really conclude that the humanity, the dignity, the value of the unborn child for Stella Creasy is basically zero. It doesn't exist. Until that child is born, and we'll see even then, it's a little bit of a grey zone. Until that child is born, there's some strange alchemy kind of works as that child passes down the birth canal. That child should be afforded no protections, no safeguards, whatever. So, don't just call these children what you like, comments here or there. Do to them what you like. Okay, that's what she is pushing for, and not just her, but many other sort of pro-abortion MPs. That is their end game. That is what the big abortion providers want. And that is, so although she's been involved in various different campaigns politically during her career as an MP, it's really on abortion, I would say, that she's been most vocal and certainly the most influential.
Yeah. And I think it's just worth mentioning, I don't know if you came across this yourself, Tim, but this whole trying to make misogyny itself a hate crime, it does open a can of worms in terms of how do we define misogyny and so on. But I don't know if you've noticed this, but she will accuse people who hold or express a pro-life view as being misogynistic. She'll call that misogyny. So I think one of the things that's going on here is it's one of the many ways she's trying to get effectively not only abortion up to birth for any reason, but also criminalize any dissenting opinion by reclassifying it as a hate crime because it's misogyny. And I've seen her even, she's blocked me now on Twitter, so we no longer have the close exchanges we used to have. But I remember seeing on social media her referring even to women who expressed pro-life views. She referred to those women as being misogynistic purely for having a pro-life view. So that's something that we need to be alert to. These changes in definition, it's easy to think, oh, that's all academic, but there's always a reason behind it. Often quite a sort of an ulterior motive that's really quite troubling, and it came up in the definition of Islamophobia. That's a whole other question. But what actually is that? But certainly, the moment you say, well, to hold that babies in the womb should have human rights, the moment that becomes misogyny and therefore a hate crime, we're into a really very much a sort of post democracy, post free speech, post truth kind of society.
Truth was the first casualty, really, I think, in all of this. But yeah, and I think we should say as well, we should be absolutely clear that this is a classic tactic of the left. This is straight out of their playbook. Saul Alinsky, etc. This is how they want it, because actually their arguments are so poor and so shoddy that they know if they're actually Stella Creasy knows if she was in a one-to-one at the Oxford Union with Jacob Rees-Mogg, she would be shredded. She would be absolutely shredded. Or likewise yourself, But she doesn't want that kind of exchange, that kind of rational exchange of ideas, because her ideas are so extreme and so kind of unconscionable. So what does she do? Yeah, she hides behind this veneer of hate speech, this misogyny, that, reclassifies everything. So basically, any opinion that isn't her own is dumped into that kind of trash pile of ideas. And then, yeah, brands as all misogynists and women haters and all the rest of it. So, yeah, quite a good strategy, actually, if you can pull it off, because it means you don't have to interact with anybody you don't like, let alone disagree with. But yeah, let's be wise to that. Absolutely, Dave. Thank you. And so let's perhaps take a closer look at some of the ways Stella Creasy has promoted abortion in the UK. As I say, very much a kind of pet project of hers. And this is going to take a little bit of time. We'll kind of go chronologically. There's maybe other ways we could do it, but just for my brain, chronologically helps. So we go back to 2019, July 2019. It was Stella Creasy who put forward the original amendment, which sought to introduce abortion into Northern Ireland, which kind of seems like years ago now. It seems like, wow, that we lost that battle ages ago. But it was Stella Creasy who was the original MP who introduced that. And there was, there were other people at fault there, but it was Creasy who took the opportunity. Let's remember again, the vast majority of people in Northern Ireland did not want abortion, did not vote for abortion. Abortion is actually opposed by a large proportion of young people, 18 to 34-year-olds, than the population at large. Tens of thousands protested in Belfast at this kind of undemocratic imposition. The government, though, doing their best now to kind of brainwash pupils through abortion education, so they're kind of trying to get to them earlier, I guess. But it wasn't something that people in Northern Ireland wanted or were looking for. We should bear in mind, and these figures have been, defended and upheld by sort of, not necessarily by pro-life organisations, that at least 100,000 people are alive today in Northern Ireland who wouldn't be otherwise because of their more restrictive, historically, abortion legislation compared to the rest of the UK. So that was reality. That's all gone now, and in large part due to Creasy's actions. So it was under a Tory government, but it was her as a Labour MP who was responsible for that. And it's really interesting to look back at how that happened, because it was legislation that was rushed through with very little debate, let alone scrutiny. It was her amendment or whatever. It was selected by the Speaker just 37 minutes before the debate began on the 9th of July, having only become known about on the 4th of July, voted through in the afternoon without, interestingly, the support of a single Northern Irish MP. So much for the will of the people. The whole process was done in a week, which is extremely rare in politics for these things to go through that quickly. So I think it's important we kind of start this story, or start some of this story there. And it's really interesting when we talk about the will of the people, when we talk about what people actually want, because Stella Creasy was actually very adamant that she didn't want the people of Northern Ireland really to have a voice on this, to be consulted in any way, shape, or form. She addressed the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. These are her exact words. It's a quote. It's really important for this House to be clear that just as we would not ask non-medical professionals to consult on how to conduct a vasectomy, we should not do so when it comes to an abortion. So, a few things to point out there. The trivialisation of abortion, I think, comes across here, which, of course, is a theme throughout this, as well as a desire to make an essentially moral matter, killing a child, an innocent child, into a medical one. Okay, abortion has never been simply a medical matter; it's always been primarily a moral one. And her vasectomy example doesn't really make a lot of sense. Not only is this an operation that affects just one person's body, not the life of another human being. The point is not that unskilled, non-medical people are somehow going to be performing these abortions as if we're going to have kind of backstreet abortions, but that the morality, the rightness or wrongness of abortion is being decided by people outside of Northern Ireland, and those people themselves have had no real consultation or say in this. So on this primarily, principally moral question, somehow these medical doctors know best, and apparently also the MP for Walthamstow knows best, but let's not let the ordinary people, people like you or me, let alone ordinary people in Northern Ireland, have any say on this, okay? And just one final thing on the science, which I can't really resist. given Stella Creasy's pronouncements elsewhere, I think we should probably be quite hesitant to trust her on anything science related anyway. So she has gone on record in the past as saying that some women were born with penises, and that a trans woman is an adult human female. So views that are not only absurd and inaccurate, but that have been actually critiqued by fellow Labour MPs, so in this case Annalise Dodds, disagreed with her view that some women are born with penises. Whether Annalise Dodds is also a misogynist, I don't know, according to Stella Creasy, but who knows? But that was her on Northern Ireland. That was kind of, I think, one of her major contributions to this, that sort of perhaps the thing that put her on the map. But she hasn't stopped there, and I think it's important to stress that. Having made very clear her stance, she's taken, I think, every opportunity to push abortion. So following Roe versus Wade last year, you probably remember the kind of hand-wringing there was in the UK, throughout the kind of intelligentsia and also MPs about this, and how awful it was, and how we must sort of protect ourselves against any such decision here. Stella Creasy expressed a desire to table amendments to the Bill of Rights to make access to abortion a human right here in the UK. Thankfully, on that issue, the government rejected the need for such an amendment. And the MP, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who I've already mentioned, among others, actually spoke very forcefully during a 3-hour debate against this bogus right to abortion and in defence of the unborn child. And it's worth watching that footage, actually, if you can find it. It's available on the Right to Life website. As while Jacob Rees-Mogg is speaking, he's interrupted by various people several times, including Stella Creasy. And what's interesting about those exchanges, you see actually the fundamental dishonesty of the pro-abortion position, because Creasy and others, what they do is they mention the usual hard cases, Dave. So things like rape, incest, fetal abnormality, I believe, without admitting several things. Firstly, that abortion in such tragic cases is already permitted under UK law. There's currently no plans to reverse that. Secondly, that such factors are not involved in the vast, vast majority, over 98% of abortions in the UK, are not for those reasons and never have been. And finally, C, that this is not what the abortion lobby are really pushing for at all. This is not what they've ever been pushing for, actually, but for abortion for exceptions in those hard cases. They want much more than that. But the argument, as I've said really already, the argument for decriminalisation, complete decriminalisation, is actually so unpopular with people, talking about the British people here, and so out of sync with the rest of Europe, and they know this, that they fall back on these tired old arguments of 70 years ago. So just come back to 2017, there was a poll done by Savanta Comres that found that only 1% of women actually in Great Britain wanted what Stella Creasy wants, which is the abortion industry wants, which is abortion available right through to birth. Only 1%. In contrast to a whopping 70% of women in Britain who favour actually a reduction in time limits. So bringing the limit down from what it currently is to 24 weeks, actually lowering that. 70%, so a vast majority of women want that lowered. Only 1% are kind of extremists like Stella Creasy. But as you know, as we see time and again, just as the justification for buffer zones, which we'll come on to in a minute, is presented as kind of very pressing, very urgent need to prevent the violent harassment of women, when actually no such thing exists. There's never been a single criminal conviction in the UK of that nature, of someone outside an abortion facility violently harassing women. This is a 100% an ideologically driven campaign with no actual basis in the need or desire of the British people. So I think that's really important to say, that how out of sync Stella Creasy, other pro-abortion MPs, and the abortion industry generally are in this kind of single-minded quest to decriminalise abortion.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of About Abortion. I hope you're appreciating these podcasts, and if you are, can I ask for your help in getting these vital messages to more people? We're delighted that we can get these to people free of charge, but that's not free for us to produce. It costs something like £300 to £400 a month to get these podcasts produced. And I wonder if you could help us, partner with us financially. Many of us will have an Amazon Prime subscription or some kind of streaming platform to the tune of £6, £7, £8 a month. I wonder if you consider, as it were, taking out a subscription with us. If you could donate, say, £8 a month, if we had about 40 people donating around £8 a month, just £8 a month, that would help us to continue to do these podcasts free of charge for anyone who wants to listen in. And this is the only podcast specifically about abortion in the UK. It's the greatest injustice, not only of our time, but in all history. Would you help us to bring these life-saving messages to more people? And don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe. Do send this in particular to your church leaders and anyone else you think might be interested. Thank you so much for your support, and I'll let you get back to the episode now.
Okay, we're making good progress. So we have Northern Ireland, we have Roe versus Wade, and then also last year we come to buffer zones when, again, Creasy hijacks this government public order bill to criminalise offers of help and support outside abortion facilities, essentially creating these what are called buffer zones. So no-go areas for pro-life people, no-go areas for prayer, which, as we've seen, extends to silent prayer, prayer inside your head, no-go areas for truth, essentially. And this horrendous legislation was passed earlier this year, 2023. And when it did, Stella Creasy, along with fellow pro-abortion MP Rupert Huck, put a video out lip-syncing to Living on a Prayer by Bon Jovi, essentially gloating, really, over this victory for the abortion kind of death cult, mocking pro-life people who value the power of prayer. I guess that was hence the choice of the song. So let's just kind of, again, to reiterate, Stella Creasy thinks wolf whistling should be illegal. She certainly thinks prayer outside abortion facilities should definitely be illegal, criminal, punishable by a prison sentence or some kind of draconian fine. But you can do what you want, when you want, to the child in the womb. All protections for the unborn child, as I say, any that still remain should be removed, scrapped from UK law. That's her end game. As I say, we're focusing on Stella Creasy, but this is a wider phenomenon, unfortunately, than just one MP. And of course, as Christians, what we would say, this isn't actually about political personalities at all. Our battle is not against flesh and blood. But I think there is a widespread ignorance as to what is going on, a huge lack of awareness, even among decent people, Christian people, people who care about these things. And we want to expose that. We want to shine a light on that. So, and I would actually say, we'll come to the politics a bit more detail in a minute. But if you are watching or listening as a long-time Labour supporter, we really want you to make a noise about this. Write to your local MP, or if you're part of the sort of Labour Party, make a noise about this. If you're in Walthamstow, or if you have another pro-abortion MP like Rupert Huck, Diana Johnson, champing at the bit to kill yet more children in the womb, we want you to make your voices heard. Okay, we want you to make as much noise as possible. One of the things, sorry, go on, Dave. Yeah,
Can I jump in before I forget? Just the whole buffer zones campaign is yet another example of what you pointed out there, straight out of the playbook of changing the language and simply insinuating, asserting that there is harassment, that there is intimidation, and basically redefining silent prayer, for example, as an act of violence. That's essentially what that bill did. It said, if you're praying silently, or if you're saying something like, "We can help you." I mean, I'm not exaggerating here. I've been involved in these displays, some of them. That they take three forms: education, offer of practical support, and prayer. And those three things have been redefined as acts of violence. No doubt she would have them put down as misogynistic acts of violence at that. And again, it's that redefining, the changing of the words that, I mean, it's becoming a cliche perhaps, but this Orwellian manipulation of language, which is so deeply wicked, because actually once words mean whatever you want them to mean, and people can be criminalized for sticking with the actual meaning of these words, you're into a pretty serious, sticky situation. And we do, of course, live in a different settlement in terms of our democratic process, etc. But culturally, what's going on is as sinister as it may not be. It may not have gone to the extent that we've seen elsewhere at other points in history, but it is of the very same nature when those who have some degree of power are changing language itself and making laws bend around their own ideologies, with no due regard for proper democratic process or the facts or evidence, for example, of so-called harassment. These things only matter when someone like Stella Creasy wants them to matter. They only count if they suit the narrative, if they fit her purposes. If they don't, she couldn't care less. She's got a goal. She wants to push it through. And if the facts line up, brilliant. If they don't, who cares? If science itself lines up, brilliant. We'll use that. If science itself doesn't help, we'll disregard that. And there's a pattern here of and as you say, Tim, it's not just about this one woman, but she is very influential, and she's an example of how one person can do a heck of a lot of damage. And she's a law unto herself. She'll use the science, use the democratic process, use the facts, the evidence when it suits. When it doesn't suit, she'll simply rewrite reality itself. And all of this in the name of making it permissible to kill human babies up till birth for any reason. That is the driving goal behind all her campaigning.
No, absolutely. And I don't think we can kind of talk enough really about the fact that our government is now arresting people for praying in their heads. That is where we've got to. This isn't George Orwell. This is reality. This is 2023 Britain. And I do think people look back on a historical moment and think, really, they did that. I think they'll look at it in ways akin to other horrific movements throughout history, not least in the 20th century, where we lost the plot. Collectively, socially, morally, we lost the plot. And I mean, this is not people ranting and raving. This is not people blocking the street to pray. This is someone praying in their head, and they are arrested for doing that. It's madness. It really is madness. But let's just quickly just finish off this story then with Stella Brown. Stella Creasy. I'm getting my Stellas mixed up. One of the things that separated Stella Brown, though, from her other pro-abortion campaigners, as we've seen, was her outspokenness, her unwillingness actually to compromise. Because while others in ALRA, the Abortion Law Reform Association, they were happy to kind of adopt a bit of an incremental approach, and they often actually avoided sort of forthright expression of their true aims because they felt society, the British public, were not quite ready for it and wouldn't have really got on board. Stella Brown, as I say, she was never really in that mindset. She never backed away from stating what she wanted, which was this right to abortion. She was not a compromiser. She was an absolutist on this issue. And Stella Creasy, I would say, is absolutely of that ilk. She is keeping that spirit alive. So 2023, again, early this year, July, very interesting debate in Parliament. Pro-abortion MP, a Tory this time, Maria Miller, with cross-party support, introduced a 10-minute rule bill seeking to prevent jail terms for any woman procuring a late-term abortion. So this was all in the aftermath of the Carla and Lee Foster case. So Carla Foster killed her unborn child through pills by post, which she took beyond the time limit that they were allowed for. And this child was of 33 weeks gestation, her little daughter. She was originally given a prison sentence. It was then sort of repealed, as it were. So this was all in the aftermath of the Foster case. Maria Miller brought forth this 10-minute rule bill, and various pro-abortion MPs, as I say, from across the House spoke in support of this. And then Stella Creasy stands up, sort of long-time foot soldier of the abortion lobby, long-time abortion campaigner. Everyone thinks they know what's coming. But actually, she shocked everyone because she opposed Maria Miller's bill. And the reason she opposed it is that really what she said was the abortion lobby, they don't want any, they oppose any change to sentencing because this gives a certain legitimation to the law as the current law. They don't want the current law tinkered with. They want it scrapped, okay? and tinkering with the law about sort of sentencing would give this sort of impression that we support the status quo. They don't, and she doesn't. They want it scrapped. They want decriminalisation. That is the end game. That is the goal. And so it was amazing, really, that when Stella Creasy sort of took that stand, but actually it's completely consistent, I would argue, with her stated goals and with the goals of the abortion industry, which is, as I say, to remove what safeguards that do still exist for the unborn child, to kind of completely scrap those and to decriminalise abortion. And what that would involve, finally, in England and Wales, is the repealing of sections 58 and 59 of the Offences Against the Person Act, along with the Infant Life Preservation Act. And again, we know this on record because we have on record, rather, Anne Ferrady, previously CEO of BPAS, saying, I want to be very, very clear and blunt, there should be no legal upper limit. So in other words, no gestational limits for killing children in the womb. You kill a child at 40 weeks, or if it's overturned 42 weeks, that's fine. That's what we want. That's what we should be allowed to do. Unless we're in any doubt about this, just last month, so following the state opening of Parliament in early November, Stella Creasy again very openly indicated her intent to hijack new government legislation to pursue this aim of decriminalisation. So we need to be aware of this threat. We need to be doing all we can to oppose it, to pray against it. We're kind of learning all the time what it's going to involve, but we have had some detail about Diana Johnson's amendment, which is really about removing any kind of making it not an offence for a woman to commit her own abortion, if you like. So again, that's about, as we say, tinkering or removing things from the Section 58 and 59 of the Offences Against the Person Act 1861 and the Infant Life Preservation Act 1929. So this would mean that a woman could carry out her own abortion at any time for any reason and face no criminal action. So that was Diana Johnson, but Stella Creasy also tabled a clause, new clause 2, which sought to repeal section 60 of the same act. And this section deals with the crime of concealing the body of a dead baby who dies before, during, or after birth. Okay, so that is, this would involve and include cases of what we'd call infanticide. You kill a baby after it's been born, it's no longer abortion, it's infanticide. So in other words, the amendment Creasy's making no longer is just impacting the safety, well-being of babies in the womb, but once they have been born. So this would essentially be about the decriminalisation, not just of abortion, but infanticide. So we need to be absolutely clear where the trajectory is here, where it is we're going, what it is the abortion lobby, the abortion industry about, and what it is that this particular MP is pushing through these various amendments, Dave. So that takes us right up to the present, really, vis-a-vis Stella Creasy. And of course, this kind of non-stop abortion promotion has caused her to be noticed by the pro-life movement. That's why we're kind of making this video. And of course, that includes CBR, Brephos, and I know there's been some interactions historically with her.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, won't go into too much detail on this particular episode, but perhaps we'll put in the links some of the write-ups and the video summaries of that campaign. But just very, very briefly, I think this was 2020 from memory. It was really in the whole Northern Ireland thing. I mean, she's been, as you've explained, she's been sporadically trying to push full decrim through one way or another. There's been the buffer zones thing, but I believe this was particularly in the wake of the Northern Ireland thing. And all we were doing was showing her own constituents in Walthamstow what she stood for. I mean, we literally had a poster of a living baby in the womb next to a picture of Stella's face in her own constituency, saying something like, your MP is working hard to take away my human rights, in the voice of the baby. And she basically bullied. she bullied the advertising company to take a poster down within hours of it going up. Yeah, she really abused her power there, and she effectively got our expression of free speech banned for a time. We had the council effectively stealing our equipment, and all sorts went down. But again, what we're seeing there is this, and one of the reasons we went after Stella, as you say, the battle is not against flesh and blood. However, there are certain agents, as it were, of the deeds of darkness who do need to be opposed. And biblically, we can see that this is what the prophets, the apostles, do when they have to do. Sometimes the prophets confronted kings face to face personally. John the Baptist named Herod and was actually pretty rude about Herod and confronted him about his sexual relationship with his brother's wife. And we see the apostles sometimes naming false teachers and troublemakers within the churches. So I think there's something of almost a myth within British evangelicalism that it's always in bad taste to name someone, to criticize someone personally. That's not Christian behavior. That's ungracious. Well, there needs to be a good reason to do it. I agree. It's not something we do willy-nilly. But what we're talking about here is someone who is aggressively campaigning for the killing of innocent babies, and that needs to be exposed. It needs to be confronted, and that's why we did it. But one thing that campaign really highlighted again was another one of these incredible inconsistencies, which again we'll post perhaps some links to where we've discussed this in more detail. But just as the facts only matter if they happen to line up with her goals, so just the reality of life in the womb, because in one context she speaks quite movingly and accurately, lucidly about life in the womb when it's a wanted child in the context of miscarriage. I remember her on social media talking about the age at which an unborn child can discern music or recognize his or her mother's voice or something. And that was one of the occasions in which I chipped in and said, yeah, I agree with you, isn't it amazing? And then got accused of being misogynistic for congratulating her on her pregnancy or something. But what you've got there is, it's a baby if I want it to be a baby. But the moment I don't want it to be a baby, it's not a baby anymore. And in fact, it becomes a hate crime for you to say it's a baby if I don't want it to be a baby. And so what she is she's really an embodiment of the insanity of our age. I was going to say the spirit of our age, but it's the insanity of my truth. And I bend reality around my own desires, wishes, feelings, and this is someone who is, but by any normal measure, highly educated, from a well-to-do background. She's not an unintelligent person, but she says things that are totally insane, like some women were born with penises, and it's no longer a baby if I don't want it to be. And so again, sometimes it's necessary to point the finger very directly at someone. And as much as on the one hand we want to say this is wicked, this is dark, this is abominable, there's also a time when actually we need to ridicule things that are totally nonsensical. We should be, I think, prepared to point out the glaring inconsistencies and the insanity of trying to claim things that are biologically, demonstrably untrue. So that's, yeah. I'll put some links into that whole campaign. But I just wanted to mention a few things as we look ahead now to the general election, which I believe is guaranteed to happen at some point within the next 12 months. We don't know when, and it seems more likely than ever, perhaps, that Labour will win. And there may well be people listening in who are historically Labour voters, and I just want to highlight a couple of things here. Now, I hasten to preface this with the fact that the Conservative Party isn't much better. The Conservative Party, it was on their watch that so much of what we've just been talking about took place, wasn't it? It may not have been initiated by them, but they did absolutely nothing to stand up and oppose, the imposition of of abortion on Northern Ireland, for example, the buffer zone stuff. One or two individuals, of course, within the Conservative Party have stood up, but as a whole, the party's been useless at stemming this flow of evil. So I'm not saying this because I think the Conservatives are a pro-life party by any means, although I think it is slightly easier to be tolerated as a pro-life MP within the Conservative Party, and there are some fantastic MPs within that party, but I think people underestimate just how pro-abortion the Labour Party is, even those who are involved as candidates of the Labour Party. So back in 2019, I stood in the local general election with the Christian People's Alliance, and we had 2 or 3 hustings events, so I got to meet the other candidates. And I had very warm exchanges with the Labour candidate in particular, actually. We had a lot in common. She had some sort of nominal Christian background. And I had a real task trying to convince her that her own manifesto really did say they were campaigning for, they were going to have abortion up till birth. She wouldn't believe me. I had to literally show her in the manifesto. Now, whether they slipped that in quite late on, I don't know. It's not something that they would have heard about at their party conferences very much. But that was in the last manifesto, was full decriminalisation. And it's one of those, again, one of those phrases that people may not understand. Of course, it leads with this idea of let's not put women in jail, which has a sort of emotional power to it. Most people instinctively would say, yeah, we don't want to put mothers in jail. But decriminalisation is code for we're going to undo, as you said, the Offences Against the Person Act, the Infant Life Preservation Act. We're going to undo and essentially rob an entire people group of their most basic, most fundamental right, which is the right to life. Is exactly what happened in the Republic of Ireland when they repealed a clause within the Constitution that was a beautiful clause that just said it very straight, that the unborn child has a right to life, has equal human rights. And they just took that clause out. And that's exactly what Labour were trying to do at the 2019 election. Of course, we don't, unless I'm mistaken, we don't have a manifesto yet. We don't know what their election manifesto is going to be in detail at this point in time. But I do want to encourage people who are considering voting for Labour, please get a hold of the manifesto, read it carefully when it comes out, and tell me if it doesn't say that they're pushing for the decriminalisation of abortion. But even if it doesn't, let's not be naive. Stella Creasy, Diana Johnson, they are not going to stop Rupert Huck until this has happened. And if Labour does win the election, that strengthens their position quite considerably. So I understand that, depending on where you live, what the different options are voting-wise, there are various factors to consider. There's tactical voting and so on, and many of us will find we haven't got any good option to vote for, and that's pretty much why I stood myself, because there was no party I could vote for last time round. But I do want to urge people to pray and consider the gravity of the fact that if any of us helps Labour to get elected, and they then go and pass the full decriminalisation of abortion, then we've played a part in that, and that will be a pretty significant turning point, which makes it even harder to get back to where we need to get.
Absolutely, and I think just to chip in very briefly, I think we haven't seen any manifestos as yet, and I think it is fair to say that Keir Starmer is generally not as extreme as Jeremy Corbyn was, and his pal John McDonnell. But I think it's worth pointing out. We've pointed this out in the past as well, but it bears repeating that all, I think it's about 29 people, but all 29 shadow ministers for Labour, not a single one of them are pro-life in their viewpoint. So you kind of, on the one hand, if you were to go to a hustings, or if you go to your Labour MP and say, well, I'm a pro-life person, is there space for me in the Labour Party, in this big tent that you talk about or whatever? Well, they're probably not going to turn around and say, well, absolutely not. But actually, when you look at it, when you look at the people they promote, and I'm sure, if you had candidates being selected from, and one was pro-choice and one was pro-life, I think we can probably guess who they're going to go for, and if they're putting someone forward to be a candidate for Parliament. So I think, let's not be naive. I think we have to realise, I do want to say there are some brave souls. There are some brave Labour MPs who are pro-life, and thank God for them. And, I think they get a rough time from their fellow MPs, from sometimes their members of the Labour Party or their constituents, and get it in the neck, really. So I think, they need our encouragement and prayers as well. And as I say, I'd like to see the Labour Party, reform on this. I'd like to see more pro-life people come from the ranks. But at the moment, as is, we've got to see the situation as it is, and it's pretty bleak,
Yeah, and I think it takes a bit of courage, doesn't it, to just admit the state of affairs. This is how things are. Now, was that the Labour Party 40 years ago or 60 years ago? Well, we need to face what it is now, what is going on now. I think that whereas as Christians, many of us would say we believe in original sin, we believe in total depravity, we believe that that it's out of the overflow of our hearts that all these wicked things come. And so we have this kind of theological belief that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And yet something I've noticed, in particular over the last few years, is that when it comes to our view of politicians, the government, the institutions as well, the professionals, the experts, we're very quick to park all of those theological beliefs to one side and just quite naively assume, well, the politicians are just trying to do their best, and we can trust the doctors. And of course, in many cases that's true. We believe in common grace, and Jesus said, even those who are evil know how to give good gifts to their children. So total depravity doesn't mean people cannot do anything good. There's common grace. But I think there's a real naivety, maybe even an unwillingness to face facts amongst a lot of British evangelicalism today. It's a lot easier to believe none of what we've just been talking about is the case. It would be easier to believe that, okay, people might be mistaken, they've got a slightly different perspective, but everyone's really trying to look after the weak, the vulnerable, and so on. But actually, if anything, we are still understating just how dark this is, and just what Stella Creasy, for example, you mentioned her no compromise stance, and that came up recently, not just from her but from others, when there was a move in Parliament to explicitly criminalise sex-selective abortion, which is already not a grounds for abortion, but there was a move to explicitly confirm that, look, we cannot abort because of the sex, the gender of the baby. And these pro-abort zealots opposed that. They said, no, we're not going to explicitly criminalise sex-selective abortion. Any abortion is fine. And so these self-professed feminists are essentially saying, hey, if someone wants to kill a baby because it's a girl, and I'm afraid it is always that way around, that's fine. Because the zeal for abortion trumps almost everything else, if not everything else. These are the kinds of people we're talking about here.
Absolutely. And probably there's a realisation that once that's admitted, that there's something dubious and suspect and wrong about this, because they're not stupid. That once that's admitted that abortion is wrong for one reason, then why is it right for any reason? So you can see why there's the absolute sheer terror that but that's where you see, well, where is their God? That which idol is ultimately going to trump the other? And actually, when push comes to shove, actually the feminist idol gets kicked out. And it's the child sacrifice idol that always wins. So yeah, I mean, this is 100% dark. And I mean, British evangelicalism, Dave. I mean, I'm sorry, and we've probably, but actually, they will talk about everything other than what needs to be talked about. They will talk about grace and love till the cows come home. Unfortunately, Jesus' message is a lot bigger than that. Jesus' message encompasses things like judgment, sin, righteousness, the narrow way, not getting into heaven unless one repents of such things. But British evangelicalism doesn't generally want to talk about that for whatever reason. They would rather have their 5 minutes of fame on BBC Radio 4 or some column time in The Guardian than Then call a spade, speak the truth in love, but speak the truth, not try to sugarcoat it, not try to kind of dilute it, water it down. So without, I'm afraid British evangelicalism is not a particularly good guide to the interpretation of Scripture or the mind of Christ at this moment in time. We've got to be completely blunt about that, because if it was, then evangelicals would be up in arms about abortion as they are in the States, but they're not. So the campaign that CBR ran vis-a-vis Stella Creasy, if we are not willing to put our head above the parapet for the sake of the 220,000 plus children, image bearers being killed in the womb each year, if we're not prepared to put our head above the parapet on that issue, then frankly, what are we good for? What are we good for? Some bland, anodyne pronouncements about climate change, which anyone could make anyway, and will be sort of applauded by all from across the spectrum. Well, great, but is that all we're good for? So I think, sorry, I've gone off on one there, but I think we have to be really clear about the spirit of the age and how much the spirit of the age has infected the mind of the church and has infected the leadership of the church. Because it's the pastors, it's the spiritual leaders that are leading the sheep kind of astray on this, really, and astray on the significance and the severity of this.
Yeah, it's a real death of the prophetic, isn't it? You look at the prophets of the Old Testament, and again, John the Baptist would be another great example of this, but also the reformers and the social reformers, who, and I'm reminded of the quote, I think it was from Martin Luther King, who said, we're to be a thermostat, not a thermometer. What good is it, a prophet, so-called, who merely mirrors back to the culture what they already believe, what they already love, what they're already comfortable with? That is utterly useless. I mean, it's less than useless. You don't need...
they're false prophets in Scripture, aren't they? That's what they call them. That's right. How they're treated, and it doesn't end well for any of them. So.
Yeah, it's prophesying smooth words. There's that funny interchange, isn't it? Is it with King Ahab, where the prophet comes who, he always tells me bad things. He always tells me bad news. And so he decides for a laugh to tell him some good news, and he says, no, come on, tell me the truth. So then he tells him the truth, which is bad news, and then he has a go at him for telling him the bad news, and that's really how things are today. Who is there? Who is willing to stand up and say these things? And actually, you have to give it to them, really, to be fair. As Jesus said, the people of this world are shrewder with their own than are the people of the light. And I think what we have to say with Stella, and both Stellas, is you got to hand it to them. They were committed. They are committed. They won't take compromise. They have foresight. They're not willing to let go on this or that because they see where that might lead. And what if we had even just 10% of that commitment, that doggedness in the church? And thank God for people like Rees-Mogg, who actually, if we didn't have a few individuals like him standing up and opposing, who knows what might have happened already in Parliament. But really, the other side puts us to shame. If we cared as much about saving babies as they care about killing babies, the face of the nation would look radically different. And you mentioned the ALRA, the Abortion Law Reform Association. That single organisation is still around today. It's changed its name. It's Abortion Rights. I get their emails. They've been around for 100 years? An incredible, so almost 100 years, an incredibly consistent, sort of almost a masterful campaigning group that steered our country to where it is today. And yet, by comparison, and I'm part of this, I'm part of the problem, you look at the church, you look at the pro-life movement, and by comparison, we are fragmented, we are small, we lack strategy and coordination, and really, they put us to shame. And so that's a challenge for all of us. And it's not enough for the church to say, well, that's your job. No, it's our job. We are Christ's representatives if we're not going to be voices for these voiceless, who is going to be? And it's for another conversation, which in fact we've already had on this channel at another point. But the record of the church, the established church, the evangelical church, right through the history of what we looked at through the two Stellas, the witness or lack thereof on the church's part is shameful. It's been shameful, actually, what we were doing or not doing throughout that time. And we won't repeat that story here, but again, I'll put some links underneath. But Tim, we've covered a lot there. Is there anything you wanted to add before we draw things to a close?
I think no. I was going to say something witty, but I don't think. I think we need to be serious here. I think we just need to put this in our minds. If this, again, remind ourselves, if this was any other people group, okay, this was any other people group that politicians were campaigning to remove any last vestiges of their human rights, of their protections, of their safeguards, to make the killing of them, utterly without impunity, without any obstacle. If this was any other people group, maybe based on the color of their skin, maybe their sexual orientation, maybe their religion, maybe their ethnicity, how would we view it? How would we view it? And how would we view those who campaign and fight tooth and nail for the removal of these very rights? Because that's what's happening. It's just that these particular human beings are a little bit smaller, or a lot smaller, a lot more vulnerable. They don't have the voice. They don't have really the other. They don't have a lot of people in their corner campaigning for them. That's the only difference. And actually, what makes it different is that only people might be watching this who they might have a certain color skin, they might be a certain ethnicity, they might be a certain sexual orientation, but every single one of us was once in the womb. Every single one of us was once a child in this kind of vulnerable situation, including Stella Creasy, including Stella Brown, and through some happy chance of they would regard it, I guess, as accident or fate, they were not dismembered or poisoned in the womb. And yet that is precisely what they're campaigning for the right to do to every other single person in that situation. That's the reality, Dave, and that's why we need to wake up and speak the truth, including to power, including our MPs, our government, because if we don't do it, who else is going to do it, essentially?